You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lay Miller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. It's hard to believe, but this is my 500th episode of the show. That's a lot of sex talk. It's funny because when I started this show back during the COVID pandemic, it was really just a fun excuse to talk to people. I didn't have any big grand plans behind the show. I was just trying to entertain myself. But people seemed to like the conversations we were having, so I started putting out episodes regularly, and here we are at episode 500. I really appreciate each and every listener for going on this journey with me, and I'm excited to keep bringing you the sex ed that you never got in school. I actually just returned from Paris and Amsterdam, where I was teaching study abroad courses on sex and culture with Sexual Health Alliance. We had the best time learning from local educators and therapists, touring some incredible museums, eating and biking our way through those beautiful cities, and having all the fun. Hopefully you'll join us on a future course. We're headed to Berlin and Copenhagen this fall and some exciting new destinations next year. You can learn more by visiting sexualhealthalliance.com. While I play catch up from being abroad for the last 2 weeks, today we're going to be replaying a classic conversation from the archives, which is my interview with Dr. Emily Jamia, which originally aired back in episode 93, where we talked all about tips for better sex. Most of us could benefit from a few pointers because great sex is usually something we have to figure out all on our own. On previous episodes of this show, we've talked about things like expanding your definition of sex, learning how to communicate what you want, and building up your sexual self-confidence. However, we're taking things a step further in this show and talking about some of the finer details. We're going to explore how you can get even more pleasure from several specific sexual activities, from masturbation to oral sex to intercourse to kink. So buckle up for some valuable sex tips. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Before we get to it, I have a quick segment I want to share with you presented by Field. Field is a dating app for the curious where you can really get to know yourself. Field wants to help us develop our self-understanding through exploring our desires and curiosities on our own terms. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think this is the perfect time to remind ourselves of something that we don't talk about often enough. This idea that you need to be fully healed to explore your desires. In fact, that idea that we have to fix everything about ourselves before we can truly connect with others is often what keeps people stuck. The reality is that we're all works in progress, and our desires, well, they're evolving alongside us. So let me offer you a simple framework. Here are 3 questions you can ask yourself if you're trying to better understand what you want right now. First, what am I curious about? I'm not talking about the things that you think you're supposed to want, but rather what actually sparks your interest. Curiosity is often the most honest starting point for desire. What do you want to try that you've never done before? Second, what are my boundaries today? And I emphasize today because boundaries aren't fixed. They can shift across contexts, experiences, and relationships. Taking the time to reflect on them helps you to show up more authentically in any given situation. And third, what kind of connection feels good to me right now? Not forever, just right now. Maybe it's something light and exploratory, or maybe it's something a bit deeper. The key is giving yourself permission to define that on your own terms. And this is what I really like about what Field is doing with the Reflections tool. It's a self-discovery experience designed to help you think through your desires, your relationship style, and your boundaries before you even start connecting with other people. Because when you have that clarity, dating starts to feel very different. There's less guesswork, less performance, and a lot more honesty. And Field itself is built around that idea. There's no fast swipe pressure. You can take your time, revisit profiles, and let attraction develop organically. People also tend to be more upfront about what they're looking for, which makes conversations feel more real and a lot less like a job interview. Plus, there's a lot of room for exploration. With over 20 sexuality and gender options, and open conversations around identities like hetero-flexible, Field creates a space for people to question labels, to evolve, and to truly be your authentic self. So if you've been feeling like you have to have everything figured out before putting yourself out there, consider this your permission not to. You can go to field.co or download Field, that's F-E-E-L-D, on the App Store or Google Play, and check out the Reflections tool to get started. All right, let's get into today's episode. Let's talk about tips for better, more satisfying sex, Emily. I'd like to focus our conversation on things that I haven't yet covered extensively on the show before. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you know all about the importance of things like sexual communication, building up your sexual self confidence, using sex toys, and the power of introducing novelty in the bedroom. And all of those things are great and important, but we've only scratched the surface when it comes to sex tips. So today, I want to dive into some specific sexual activities and talk about how you can get even more pleasure from them. Or if you're not finding them to be pleasurable in the first place, how you can make them more enjoyable. So, we're going to talk about a lot of partnered activities, but let's start with solo sex. So, a lot of people masturbate in the exact same way every time they do it. And this way often mirrors how they did it the first time they masturbated. And this makes sense because they know that it works. But if you've only ever masturbated in one way, you might be missing out. And there can be a lot of value in self exploration through masturbation because you can potentially unlock or discover new sources of pleasure. So, Emily, what do you suggest for people when it comes to getting more pleasure out of masturbation, especially if there's somebody who has only ever done it in one way before?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start because let me tell you, nobody on the planet is going to touch you exactly the way that you touch yourself. I mean, especially, I think this is especially true for women. There are so many little micro adjustments that are being made, in a millisecond that a partner is never going to be able to replicate ever. Your vibrator may come pretty close, but if we're taking that out of the equation, what I always do is encourage women to explore their whole bodies. Our bodies are filled with erogenous zones. And, a lot of times when people masturbate, like you said, they find what works and that's what they go to every single time. But if you view masturbation not just as an opportunity to get off or relieve stress or help yourself fall asleep, and more as an opportunity to learn your body, I think that there is so much more pleasure to be found. I mean, the whole body is loaded with nerve endings. I think a lot of people feel almost awkward with the idea of kind of massaging themselves from head to toe. But I think when you can get over that hump and release some of the inhibitions, you'll find that you're actually doing a lot to build arousal and that you probably don't have to touch yourself, on your genitals very long at all in order to have an orgasm. And so I think it's useful because you can then communicate to your partner what also feels good to you rather than relying on them 100% to explore you.
And I think you make such a great point about how the sensations that you might get during solo masturbation can be totally different from the sensations you're getting during partnered sex. And if you're used to orgasming from the way that you masturbate and you're expecting to have an orgasm during partnered sex, but you're not getting that same stimulation, that can make it hard to have an orgasm. And, I think there's a lot of people who tend to think that, everybody with a certain set of genitals that they all masturbate the same way. So for example, if you have a penis that you necessarily engage in a stroking motion, but if you survey men about their masturbation techniques and habits, you'll actually see wide variability in how they do it. And for example, some people, instead of stroking, they do rubbing. And some people focus on one specific area of the penis. Maybe their head or glands is super sensitive. And so that's where they focus all of the attention. And maybe they've got props and maybe they've got porn. And, there's so much variability in terms of how people approach this. And so something you can potentially do is when you're masturbating to try and explore different techniques that are going to more closely mimic the sensations that you're getting during partnered sex, especially if you're having a hard time orgasming during partnered sex. So mixing it up, trying new things during masturbation can actually help you to have better sex and maybe even be more orgasmic when you're with a partner. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, especially for my clients who are penis owners, who are having issues climaxing during intercourse or during partnered sex. I mean, the first thing I tell them is to switch up the way that they masturbate. If they're always dependent on just their hand and the tube of lotion on their nightstand, to get a fleshlight or to do a little bit of the stop start technique so that they can build awareness of when they're approaching that point of no return, or even let themselves lose their erection and then do what they need to do to bring it back, because that might happen during partnered sex. And you can't let the loss of an erection totally derail you from your experience of pleasure, because there's so much more that goes into it. And the same goes for women. for vulva owners, if they always touch themselves the exact same way, but maybe they have a partner who really likes exploring their breast and incorporating that, then I say spend more time touching your breast. I mean, and see what it feels like to turn yourself on in the same way. It's all about collaboration at the end of the day.
It absolutely is. Now, let's talk about oral sex. I tend to get annoyed when I read articles about oral sex tips because many of them act like all genitals of the same type are interchangeable and that there's like this one specific magic formula that's going to work for everyone in terms of having mind blowing oral sex. But that's just not the case. Everybody's body is a little bit different in terms of the areas that are most sensitive and what feels good. You also have variability across partners in terms of genital fit. So, for example, the size of the mouth and then the size and shape of the genitals that they're stimulating. Everybody's body isn't going to line up in the same exact way. So, one of my best tips for oral sex is to not just repeat the same pattern every time with every partner. You have to mix up your technique, just like as we were talking about with masturbation, but also adapt to what brings your partner pleasure. So, Emily, can you share with us some of your favorite tips on how to have better oral sex?
Yeah, I would say one of my best tips for better oral sex is to not become overly dependent on your mouth. Now, that may sound very counterintuitive because we're talking about oral sex, but the more you incorporate your hands or other parts of the body, or if you stop and take a break and just use your hands and then come back to using your mouth, that can be really exciting and stimulating for people. So many of us draw our ideas of what people want during oral sex from porn or what they read in a magazine, but that's not what feels good to a lot of people. So, you can read every sex tip out there. Your partner is your best manual. And so you have to talk to them about what feels good. Now, a lot of times people don't really know what feels good. You don't know what you don't know. And so that's where having the freedom and confidence to explore and be a little bit experimental comes into play. If you are giving oral sex to someone who's a penis owner, see how they like it when you also include your hand and massage the base of the penis, or if you stimulate their testicles, or maybe you reach around back and include a little anal play. I mean, a lot of times it's a combination of sensations that really intensifies the pleasure. But I think people have this idea that oral sex is just oral and like everything else it does is not a part of the equation. But I think that people find if they incorporate a little bit more of their body that it can definitely intensify the pleasure.
Yeah, and a lot of the common complaints that I hear from people about oral sex suggest this over reliance on the mouth. They're just like, my jaw gets so tired, or my neck ends up really hurting or cramping or something like that. And it's like, maybe don't focus so much on the mouth and use your hands and other things. Like, there are all kinds of ways to make this something that is more mutually pleasurable. And the problem, I think, is that a lot of people will have this experience where it becomes physically uncomfortable for them to perform. And then they decide they don't like oral sex. And then that can create conflict or disagreement in the relationship because maybe the other partner does really enjoy it. And so, if you can figure out a way to adapt your technique that works for you and works for your partner, that's really going to be one of the keys to having great oral sex.
Totally. I mean, my clients are not allowed to use the word perform at all. I mean, at a very fundamental, good sex obviously is mutually consensual and it's mutually pleasurable. And to your point, if your partner really enjoys oral sex, but you A, feel like you have to perform, or B, you get a pinched nerve in your neck every time, you're not going to want to do it. So you have to work together, and chances are you can find something that feels good for both of you.
Yeah. And all kinds of aids you can use, from pillows and different positions, and get creative and try some different things. So let's talk about penile vaginal intercourse. This is a part of sex for a lot of people, but it's something that a lot of people seem to struggle with in terms of maximizing pleasure. I mean, there wouldn't be so many magazine articles out there about this if, it was just so naturally easy for everyone. But one of the biggest issues that arises, of course, is that you have a lot of men who will orgasm very quickly, and you will have a lot of women who maybe it takes a very long time for them to orgasm, or they just don't orgasm at all. So, what are some tips on how you can make vaginal intercourse more pleasurable for everyone and increase those odds of mutual orgasm?
Oh, okay. So people always forget about the coil alignment technique, which is the one of the best techniques in achieving this exact goal. So in the coital alignment technique, the penis owner is on top, the vulva owner is on bottom, and he inserts himself, but then he kind of adjusts his body so that he's a little bit higher than she is. So you can imagine like the top of her head is maybe at his shoulders so that their pubic bones are really lined up. And rather than doing kind of an in and out thrusting, which is going to bring him to orgasm more quickly, he's staying inside and doing more of a grinding. So this is going to slow down how long it takes him to reach orgasm and probably provide her with more constant clitoral stimulation externally, which is, what's preferable for most women, and make her reach an orgasm more quickly. So it slows it down for him. It increases the speed for her, usually, if she's able to climax that way. Plus, you get full body contact. And so we know that skin to skin contact really releases a lot of oxytocin. It can be a very emotionally gratifying, pleasurable position for a lot of people. You can still maintain eye contact. You feel very close, and that's important for a lot of people. And so I think it's a position that can potentially check every box. It's a great option for penis vagina intercourse.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the coital alignment technique. That was sort of the first place that my mind went as well. And you're right that people do tend to forget about it. And I think it's because it just doesn't have a very good name. Like, I think it needs a rebrand because when you say coital alignment technique, people are like, what the hell is that? Like, it's very clinical and you have to do this kind of elaborate description of it. And I think another easy way to think of it is that basically you're in a position where the base of the penis is going to be coming into constant contact with the clitoris and you're maintaining this penile clitoral connection the entire time. So it's just this very different way of having sex. And you can think of it as grinding or rocking as opposed to in and out thrusting. So it's a different approach to sex. It works for some people. The data is there that it actually increases the odds of women orgasming and also increases the odds of simultaneous orgasm happening. So it is an evidence-backed technique. But something else you can do is just mix it up and try different positions. And the positions that might work best for you is going to depend on your body and it's going to depend on your genital alignment. And so, for example, there's a fair amount of research finding that the distance between the clitoris and the vaginal opening is an important predictor of whether or not someone with a vulva is going to experience an orgasm during penile vaginal intercourse. And the shorter the distance is, the more likely she is to have an orgasm. And the wider the distance, the less likely she is. So if you can figure out different types of positions that are going to naturally provide more clitoral stimulation, or if you can add more clitoral stimulation through the use of sex toys or hands, then, that's another way that you can provide that assist in cases where maybe there is that greater clitoral vaginal distance.
Totally. I mean, I have so many female clients who have totally written off any rear entry positions because they feel like it's not intimate. They can't maintain eye contact. I'm like, you guys are missing out. I mean, any rear entry position makes it so easy either for you to touch your own clitoris on the front or for your partner to reach around and stimulate your clitoris. And it can be wildly pleasurable and still incredibly intimate. I mean, I do encourage eye gazing, and I think the ability to do that can be an indicator of how emotionally vulnerable you can be in your relationship. But to totally eliminate a wide variety of positions because you can't in that moment look at each other in the eyes, I think is going to be pleasure reducing. You're eliminating a lot of opportunity for external clitoral stimulation, which is very pleasure enhancing for a lot of women.
Yeah. And, another quick fix for that particular position and that particular concern is invest in some mirrors, right? That you can put in the bedroom. And then you can look at your partner's face. You can look into each other's eyes through the mirror, or you can just look at the expressions of pleasure on their face. You can also look at yourself. Some people find that to be really arousing. So, there's all kinds of ways. There's always a solution.
You got to think outside the box a little bit.
Think outside the box. Here's a simple question. What's the outfit you actually live in? Not the one you plan to wear, but the one you keep reaching for over and over again. For me lately, it's been Cozy Earth's brushed bamboo jogger set. It's one of those rare things that's soft enough to sleep in, but still looks put together enough that if someone comes knocking on the door, you're not scrambling. It just works for your whole day, from morning coffee to getting work done to winding down at night. What you wear at home matters just as much as what you wear out, maybe even more. The fabric is breathable, it moves with you, and somehow it feels even softer over time. The same thing is true with their clogs. They've got that cushioned, supportive feel where you can be on your feet, moving around the house, or even step outside, and you forget you're wearing them. They're just easy. What really stands out with Cozy Earth is the attention to detail and the quality. This is the kind of stuff you'll be reaching for years to come, and they back that up with a 10-year warranty, which tells you a lot about how these are made. So this spring, give yourself the kind of comfort that lives with you all day, not just the moment you get home. Head to cozyearth.com and use my code Justin for an exclusive 20% off. And if you see a post-purchase survey, let them know you heard about Cozy Earth right here on the Sex and Psychology podcast. Cozy Earth. Comfort lives here. Do you ever find yourself dreaming about a career where you get to talk about sex and psychology all day long? What if I told you there's a place that can connect you with world-class experts and has a large, thriving community? Sexual Health Alliance does just that. Sexual Health Alliance helps you to build the career of your dreams and is at the forefront of sexuality education. Students come from all parts of the world and from all types of backgrounds. Whether you're in school just starting out on your journey or building advanced skills in your profession, Sexual Health Alliance's comprehensive certifications, engaging events, and self-paced online education will move you beyond the basics and set you up to become sexceptional. Visit sexualhealthalliance.com and start building the sexuality career of your dreams today. And let them know that you heard about Sexual Health Alliance on this podcast. So let's talk about anal sex. This is an activity that more and more people are trying. Some people love it, and some people have orgasms from anal penetration alone. But there are others who find this activity to be uncomfortable, even painful, or they just don't get much pleasure out of it. And one tip that I can share for this is that for a lot of people, they don't do any warm-up period. They just go from nothing to full penetration. But instead, if you take some time on your own, either before sex or with your partner, to loosen up a bit, whether that's with fingers or sex toys or dilators, that can make penetration during sex much easier and more comfortable and reduce the risk of pain and potential injury. So, Emily, what else would you advise when it comes to comfortable, pleasurable anal sex?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the biggest issue for people, which is going too far too fast. So, going from no anal play to an attempt to a penis and an anus is kind of a rookie move. I mean, first of all, I encourage everyone to get comfortable. And that may be when you're in the shower, where maybe you're sudsing up a little bit, and just explore, stay on the outside even, and see what that feels like. People have so many automatic negative reactions to their body parts, and that includes their anus. And so it's really important that you get comfortable with that part of your body first before you can expect to be comfortable with someone else touching you there. A lot of people don't realize how much they clench up because they're nervous that it's going to hurt, or because they can't imagine, they haven't imagined maybe anything going inside. And so it's really important, I think, to practice on your own breathing and maintaining a sense of relaxation and ultimately getting comfortable with that part of your body. And then when you're with a partner, again, start externally. There are tons of nerve endings just on the outside. Anal play does not always have to include intercourse. And this is something I think a lot of people kind of forget, but sometimes just a finger on the outside during oral sex or something like that can really intensify pleasure for people. And then if you are going to experiment with penetration, like you said, go slow. Start with, a little bullet, or there are lots of toys out there that are stepping stones for something larger going inside. And then lastly, use all the lube. I mean, just use all the lube. Don't be shy. You're going to need that because that part of the body does not lubricate the way like a vagina does. And so you can't expect it to be very pleasurable without a lot of lube. So those are my kind of quick tips for better anal play.
Yeah, and I think experimenting with different types of lubes can also be helpful because some lubes last longer, some are slicker, and don't be afraid to reapply as many times as you need it. And you can also get products that will help insert the lube beforehand so that it goes deeper. So it's sort of like a lube injection, if you will. And, this is actually one of the problems with anal sex when people experience pain from it is that they're only applying lube to the outside and not to the inside. And it's like, the lube's got to go in. So, make sure that you're applying it correctly and, experiment with different types of lubes because you might find that they interact with your body in different ways. So, yeah, again, explore, experiment. So let's get a little bit kinky. So, a lot of people are turned on by sexual role play, and this could involve, for example, taking on a dominant or submissive role, or adopting other roles or identities or personas. And a lot of people are turned on by the idea of role play. I find that if you look at people's sexual fantasies, it's a pretty common fantasy. But many people struggle with it in real life because it doesn't feel natural to them and they get really in their head. So, for people who think the idea of role play is awkward or stressful or it's just not clicking for them, how can they make it more fun and enjoyable and really get into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think the first thing you have to remember is if your partner says this is something that would be really exciting to them, unless you have a very good reason that it is a hell no for you, you always want to be willing to try. And you can't let feelings like awkwardness stop you. A lot of times people ask me, like, how do I do X, Y, or Z without feeling awkward? And my answer to them is you don't. You have to be willing to push through the awkwardness and trust that you have a partner there who's not going to laugh at you or make you feel bad because maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable. Anything that's new and you're doing for the first time is going to feel a little bit awkward. I'm sure anyone can think back to like the first sexual experience they ever had, and probably they'll relate to feelings of awkwardness or insecurity or feeling unsure. And the same thing applies when we're trying anything new sexually with a partner, and that includes role play. And so it may be that the first few times you do it, you giggle your way through, or maybe you have to stop and take a break. But I always encourage people not to give up the first time if it doesn't go exactly according to plan, or maybe it didn't end up being as exciting as you thought it was going to be. Anything you want to improve at, you have to practice. And that includes anything sexual. Rarely is something new going to be amazing the first time you do it. It's a skill set that you have to develop like anything else. And I'll add to role play in particular that I think so many people are guilty of reducing sex down to a function of the body and forget that sex can be a wonderful opportunity for self expression and self expansion. That includes tapping into different parts of our psyches and our minds and our personas. And what better way to do that than with a loving partner? Or maybe someone you don't know that well. That's fine too. But there's so much to be said for the meaning that we can get from a sexual experience if you think about it a little bit more. It's something I talk a lot about in my online workshop is rather than thinking of like all the wild and crazy things you might do sexually, spend a little more time like just thinking of the meaning of the sexual experience. Do I need sex right now to, release some anger and aggression? And can I do that in like a safe, pleasurable way? Or do I need to feel like I can see sex as an opportunity to heal from something? Or do I just want to play and like be silly and, bring some body paint in or feel creative? I mean, there's so many things you can do through sex. It's really adult play. Adults forget that play is really important. I mean, we're seeing this in, these huge Fortune 500 companies, like they're building playrooms in, in the offices where people work so that they can go like tap into some creative, fun energy. And sex is an opportunity for adults to play and have fun too. And that includes role play.
Yeah. And role play can be a great way to be creative and to also explore different sides of yourself and maybe see yourself in a different way or in a different light for the first time. And if you're curious about trying role play, a piece of advice I would offer is not to like spring that on your partner at the last minute, like right before sex. This was a long time ago. I had someone a partner who had a very specific role play scenario they wanted to try. And it was just kind of like, okay, here's what I want to do. Here's your role. Here's my role, and go. And I'm just like, um, this isn't going to work for me. And that to me felt like a performance where it's like suddenly I have to like figure everything out right in that moment. And it was too stressful. It was too much. So don't spring it on your partner. Give them some time to adjust to the idea and maybe do some practice with it. And maybe, for example, with role play, you can begin that over text. And, that can reduce some of the sort of sense of pressure, and it can kind of help you to get in the role a little bit, get a little bit of practice about what is your voice? How do you want to communicate? What do you want to say? And then you can take that skill once you've sort of built it up in that comfort level and apply that in the bedroom. So I think, as with everything, it's all baby steps. And also with role play, using costumes and props and like really getting into it, committing, can be another way of really kind of getting past some of the stress and awkwardness of it.
Yeah. And I would add that, let's say it does just not really end up going the way that you planned. That's okay. So what? I mean, then you and your partner have this shared experience that you can kind of look at each other and wink and have a good laugh about from time to time. So we really have to let go of this idea that sex has to be perfect, or if you don't hit the mark every time, that it's a bad experience or wasn't worth it. I mean, that's just a mindset thing. One of my first sex therapy supervisors, Ruth Sherman, always used to say, when you're making love, you can't go wrong. And I think that was just such a beautiful sentiment. But yeah, we gotta let go of some of this inhibition and not forget to play.
Yeah. And it's okay to laugh and have fun, right? I think a lot of people just take sex very seriously. And there is that need to relax, to be in the moment, to feel the ability to express any emotions that you're feeling. And laughter can be one of them, right? And it can actually make the sex more fun. It can break some of the tension, and it can be an intimate moment. So just have fun with it. It's play after all. So let's talk about sexual fantasies for a little bit. So, I see in my research that sharing and acting on sexual fantasies is linked to greater sexual and relationship satisfaction. Most people report positive experiences when they do this. And if you look at the people who report keeping passion alive in their relationships long term, one of the key things they're doing that differentiates them from everybody else is that they're getting more in touch with their fantasies. But a lot of people really struggle when it comes to communicating a sexual fantasy. And further, especially when it comes to acting on it, because a lot of people are just like, I don't even know where to start, no matter what the fantasy is, just because they don't really have a script for kind of how it should go. So do you have any tips when it comes to sharing and or acting on fantasies to make this a little easier so that people can kind of tap into those benefits?
Yeah. So, one thing I want to say first, if you're feeling inhibited about expressing a sexual fantasy, is to remember, and I'm going to repeat what I said a little bit ago, which is that when you reduce sex down to a function of the body, you are really eliminating some of the essential elements that make human sex so unique and wonderful. And one of those is our ability to conjure these very complex mental images that are sexual and can add a lot to enhance the pleasure that we feel, whether we keep them internal and just reflect on them with a partner, or if we express and share them. And, as you found in your research, I think it was like 97% of your participants admitted to having fantasies, and probably the other 3% were lying.
That's right. I wouldn't necessarily say the other 3% were lying. Some of them probably were, but I did get an email just this week from a listener of the podcast who said they have what's called aphantasia, where they have this inability to visualize mental imagery, whether it's sexual or otherwise. So there are some people who literally can't have sexual fantasies in the form of mental images. And that's a study we could potentially do at some point, because what are the implications of that for sexual function? I think that would be fascinating to explore. But sorry to interrupt you. So
That's fair enough. And maybe you can't say this, but I will. Maybe at least a few of those people who said they never have them were lying.
yep, I would agree.
So, okay. So it's such a common human experience, yet, like many things, it's something people feel so inhibited about. So, my advice to sharing a sexual fantasy is to write it down yourself first. Sometimes just seeing it in black and white. And I always encourage people to handwrite, not to type. The reason is we have evidence to suggest when we handwrite, it slows us down, it accesses a different part of the brain, it gets us more in touch with our emotions. And by putting it out there, you've then externalized it, but just for yourself at that point. Once you feel comfortable with that, maybe you just hand that piece of paper over to your partner. I would always encourage people to first say, "Hey, I have this sexual fantasy and I would love to be able to share it with you. Are you open to receiving it?" I think if you just put it out there without kind of preparing your partner a little bit, maybe you are at a bit of a greater risk for them kind of having a shocked look on their face, or I didn't know you had those kinds of thoughts, which will make you feel judged, which is what we want to try to avoid. And you may say things like, I have these thoughts. It doesn't really fit with how you typically see me, but I would love to express those to you. Is that okay? So once you've sort of prepped them, then I think they're in a place to at least more neutrally receive what you have to say. And then if it's something that you want to act out, well, just like what we were talking about with role playing, preparing ahead of time. Okay, so if we were to try this out, like, what would that look like? How would it feel to you? Are you comfortable in this role? Do you have any limitations? Like, how can we collaborate to make this a fun and pleasurable experience? Something that went up a lot during COVID were these like virtual sex parties. So, like, maybe someone has a sexual fantasy about group sex, but their partner is like, yeah, that's not going to happen for me anytime soon. Maybe you sort of play with it virtually for a while and see how that feels, if that's a little bit safer for you. Sometimes it's just talking dirty. Once you share a fantasy with your partner, maybe they just say something periodically during the sexual experience that lets you know they're kind of aligned with a thought that you're probably having at that moment. So there's lots of ways to share a fantasy with a partner that can intensify the pleasure.
I think that's all great advice. And when it comes to acting on fantasies, doing that research, planning ahead is really important. The fantasy isn't just going to happen spontaneously. And if it does, it's probably not going to go the way that you had envisioned. So, for example, if your biggest fantasy was a threesome and, you and your partner are both on the same page about wanting that, but you never really discuss it. And then one night at the bar, you just kind of pick somebody up and go home with them and have it, it might turn out to be really awkward and no one gets what they want from that situation. So doing that research, planning ahead, making sure you have that really good communication is really essential when it comes to sharing and acting on sexual fantasies.
I just want to add one thing to that, Justin, because it kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, which is baby steps. So, like for this example with the threesome, like something I advised a couple just recently was, rather than jumping straight to a threesome, what if you go to a bar and if you meet someone, maybe you just kiss them at the bar and like that's where it ends, and you see how that feels. Then go home, digest what that experience was like, and talk about if you want to take it further. You don't have to jump into the deep end if you don't want to.
I think that's really important to keep in mind. Now, I know we're running short on time, but I have just one more question for you. And it's really about whether you have just another general tip that can help people in terms of how they approach sex. And so for me, one of my big tips is to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit, right? So a lot of people like to play it safe when it comes to sex, and that makes sense, right? And they know based on their previous experiences what they like, what they enjoy. And then every time they have sex, they stick within those boundaries or limits of their previous experiences. And the idea of stepping beyond that zone can feel a little intimidating, even scary. And unfortunately, if you never step outside of that zone, you can never tap into the real excitement that comes from trying something a little bit new, trying something that might be a little bit challenging. You have to learn to embrace a little bit of discomfort to be able to step outside of that comfort zone and really explore and expand your sexuality. So I'm curious, do you have any other tips that you would share just for general mindset and the way that you approach sex so that you can maximize pleasure?
Yes, I have a tip, and it's probably one that isn't talked about as commonly, and that is to practice high degrees of attunement. So, what does that mean? That means learning to attune to your partner's cues. That usually starts outside the bedroom. I think we're so distracted all the time. We're overly dependent on technology that we forget that there is so much happening energetically with our partner that we're not really paying attention to and thereby not attuning to. Cindy Meston is doing a lot of interesting research at UT right now on like physiological synchrony and sexual satisfaction. And she's got some preliminary evidence that shows that couples who are really highly attuned to one another, such that like their heart rates are almost in sync, have higher levels of sexual satisfaction. And I think one of the best ways to intensify pleasure during sex, we talk so much about like sexual communication. But if you can get past that to where you don't have to talk as much and you can just like kind of know when your partner moves a certain way, what that's maybe signaling to you, that's really when sex can have that effortless feeling. Imagine a pair of ballroom dancers who've been dancing together for decades and how they seem to just move almost as one. I think that's what a lot of people want to experience during sex. And the way you get there is to pay close attention to nonverbal cues and shifts in energy and breath and the things that a lot of times we're kind of disconnected from these days. So that's one of my biggest tips.
Love it. Get attuned with your partner. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Emily. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work, to take your workshops and, just see all the other amazing things that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. It was such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on. So everything can be found at emilyjamia.com. You'll find my online workshop there, which is all about attunement plus how to experience flow during sex. And I'm happy to give your listeners a discount code. So if you use the code half off, then you can apply that and get 50% off the workshop. And then, of course, I'm across all the social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamia. And I have a podcast as well. It's called Love and Libido. So anyone can go check that out too.
I highly encourage you to check it out and to check out Emily's workshops.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.